Hi, everyone. Hoping that you all are well. We are back to continue our discussion and examination of the Babylonian Empire and the Holy Roman Empire. What has come up essentially is not only are Rome and Babylon synonymous, but they are also synonymous with Austria. What else has come up is the fact that the Holy Roman Empire appears to be an empire of a deity, an Egyptian deity known as Set or Seth or Seth. And we've talked about this deity before. We've talked about this deity extensively. And so not only is Set an Egyptian deity, but Set is also associated with what's known as Typhon. And so you might see Seth Typhon or Typhon Seth. And it's that sort of donkey looking deity. Now, what has been uncovered in looking at the history of the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, and Set, is that at the heart of those papal bulls that gave the authorization for the colonizing of the entire world, at the heart is Set. Set is actually inside of the papal bulls. And Set is the entity, according to the papal bulls, that gave the church, the Roman church, and these monarchs. Set is the one, according to their narratives, that gave them the authority to conquer America, to enslave the people, to remove people, and to take the resources. And this all is under the authority of Set, apparently pursuant to what we have presented by the popes. And so, what also is apparent is that over time, this Set entity has been infused into, it looks like, all of the cultures around the world. And so, this entity known as Set or Seth or Seth is presented as something that is omnipresent. Not only omnipresent, but because of the other names for Set, this sort of almighty, there's the putting forth of the idea of Set being omnipotent, all powerful. And so that's what's going on with respect to this Holy Roman Empire. And a part of the conquest dynamic involved a confederacy. It's a confederacy, apparently, of a number of areas or a number of collectives of people. And the confederacy also appears to have sort of a revenge dynamic going on, some sort of revanchism going on. Now, it's not completely clear where this is all coming from, but that is what appears to be going on. So it didn't just appear out of the air, this idea of conquest. It appears to have come from somewhere. And the focus, apparently, is what we understand to be the West. And this is coming from what we understand to be the East. And so there is this East-West dynamic. However, the construct of East is not simply about a direction. There's a little bit more going on with that construct of East that explains a little bit more about the conflict between the East and the West. And so we're going to dive into that whole construct of the East to better understand this empire that is Set's empire. And so, one thing that I want you to keep in mind is this idea of revanchism. And so, revanchism is that dynamic wherein individuals who have lost something seek to reclaim the territory or the property that they believe they lost. And so, there's sort of a revenge paradigm operating. And individuals who practice this dynamic, they are known as revanchists. And so, with respect to the Holy Roman Empire, what we appear to have are these collectives of revanchists. Now, what this revanchism is all about, again, is not completely clear, but it is clear that there is this revanchism paradigm that is operating with respect to the colonizations, the settling that has gone on, and the appropriation of resources. And so, what we know right now is this thing identified as Imperium Sine Fine. We know that that means empire without end. And we also know that this is referencing the Babylonian Empire, the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, and essentially Seth's empire. What's also noteworthy about this confederacy is that it is reminiscent of passages in Scripture that refer to individuals who will be so numerous that they are as many as the sands of the sea. And so that's what is suggested with respect to the Confederacy, with respect to this empire. It's an empire where the sun never sets. It's an empire with no boundaries, no geographic boundaries, an empire with no people boundaries. This empire is everywhere at the same time, all over the place, simultaneously. And so, again, it knows no limits. Hence, that construct of universal. And so it is an empire. Seth's empire is being presented as a universal empire, Roman Catholic, the Catholic being universal. And that is what Seth's empire is being presented as, this universal empire. Now, I just want to quickly look at a couple of passages in this text called Historical Origins, and it's from 1889, written by a Robert Shaw. And so we're going to look at a couple of passages very quickly so that we can get an idea of this connection between Set and Seth and Seth. Also, inside of this text is a critique. There's a review of the history of the Scots or the Gaels, and the history of ancient Egypt. In this text, there is an offering that Seth is also spelled Seth, so that TH can be swapped out for the PH. There's also a suggestion that Joseph in Scripture, who ventured to Egypt, that this individual has this Seth or Seth as a part of Joseph's name. And so there's a connection that is being made, according to this author, between Joseph or Yusef and the deity Set. Also relevant to our discussion, our examination, is the assertion by this historian that the star Sirius, the dog star, is called also by the Egyptians Soth or Seth or Seth. And so, in other words, the star Sirius, the dog star, is the same as Set. Now let's get back to Austria. And so what we're going to do is we're going to deconstruct Austria so that you have a better idea of this motto of Austria shall rule the world. And as you recall, the abbreviation for that is AEIOU. And as we get into this, I want you to keep it at the forefront of your mind that Austria is synonymous with Rome and is synonymous with Babylon. And so here we see the direct translation out of the Latin into the English. And what we have here with that motto is Austria is to rule the whole world. Now I'm going to keep reminding you of SETH in this narrative. And so what you're going to see ultimately is that this is essentially saying SETH is to rule the whole world. Also, if you recall, the other way of looking at that motto is all earth is subject to Austria. And so we're going to insert SETH in there yet again. All earth is subject to SETH. And not only SETH, but SETH's empire. And so this motto indicates Austria is to rule the whole world. And what else is being said, of course, is Babylon is to rule the whole world. Rome is to rule the whole world. SETH or SETH is to rule the whole world. Now, what's interesting about the word Austria is that it really is broken down into two parts. And so we're going to break it down into those two parts so that you can better see exactly how Babylon, Rome, Austria, how they are all tied together. And not only how they are all tied together, but how a number of other entities are tied in with this construct of Austria. And so when looking at the translation, we see that another way of saying Austria or Os is Oster, and that's in Swedish. And here you can see that another word for Ost or Oster is east. And so Austria is referring to the construct of east. But east is not simply about a direction. And so what we have here when looking at east is that it's another way of saying star. And so you see east, easterly, eastward, ost, east, literally toward the sunrise. And so this is about that morning star. This is about the dawn, the star of the dawn. And so you can also see the root of os is also to shine. And to shine is full of so much symbolism, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And so east, again, is about a little bit more than simply direction, but it is definitely referring to direction. And it is talking about this idea of shining or a star, and specifically a morning star. And so even with this, you can start to see the connection with SETH. And you might have already recognized this, but Easter is tied to this construct of east, and also referring to the dawn, also related to the name of a goddess. And so you can see again, Ost is east, toward the sunrise, again, to shine, especially of the dawn. And here you can see that etymology breakdown again. You can see that EST is the same as EAST, and AUST O-S-T-R and A-U-S-T-R-A. So you might think of not only Austria, but Australia. And yes, they are the same. And you also see this O-S-T when looking at the northern or north languages. So you see O-O-S-T and O-S-T. All of this is east. Another construct that essentially means east or means star, shining, is that name Esther. Now, Esther is an interesting book in scripture that doesn't actually seem quite real, quite frankly. And so if you look at the book of Esther, you'll notice that it's sort of odd and it sticks out in terms of scripture narratives. But there is a lot of importance placed on this entity known as Esther. And this was a name that she had taken on or that had been given to her. It was a Persian name, and Persia is another name for Iran. And so, in terms of the Abrahamic narrative, Esther served as sort of a deliverer. What's also interesting is that in the narrative, she had a relative named Mordecai, and Mordecai is another way of saying Marduk. So if you want to look a little bit more at Marduk, we've looked at Marduk before, but there is this connection between Esther and Marduk. And essentially, Esther is another way of saying a morning star, a day star. Esther is the eastern star. Okay, so moving right along, we go back to os, that root. We see again, this is about to shine and the dawn, and you can see other words that are coming from this particular root. And so you see austral, you see Australia, Austria, Austro. Interestingly, you also see aurora, and aurora has a very special relationship to another construct that we've looked at before. And so you see east, Easter, Ostrogoth. And then you see that this construct is very old because you see in the Sanskrit that this is essentially meaning dawn, yet again, also related to the Latin aurora, which was the goddess of the dawn. Also associated with the south wind. And so we get into those direction dynamics again. And so most of the time we don't think of the south and the east as synonymous. But as you know, the south and the north are interchangeable, according to some things that we have been looking at. And so if you are not familiar with an aurora, aurora is from the Latin dawn, goddess of the dawn again. And if you look to the side, you can see what's understood as an aurora borealis. Now, the northern lights provide quite a light show. As I understand it, I have never seen the light show from the northern lights, but it provides, according to the narrative, quite a light show. And often you can see the auroras, you can see the aurora borealis appearance in the sky. And notably, the corona is considered the most spectacular form of a rayed aurora. If you recall, we looked at this construct of before. If you look at Strong's 217, you see fire, light. This is referring to not only flame, but a place in Babylon. And so this idea of the east is synonymous with this related to a region that is known as the region of light, fire and light, and it's And again, this is associated with Abram and Abram's father. And if you recall, there's a reference to of the Chaldeans. And so that's what this is referring to. And so here you can see that this construct of light and flame and fire, this essentially means east. And this is referring to a place called Babylon. And so Babylon is synonymous with this construct of east, this construct of flame, this construct of light or fire. And here at 218, you can see this is the same as a place in Chaldea, also the name of an Israelite. Sometimes these types of things create quite a bit of confusion because you might be talking about one entity and thinking you're talking about another entity. And so it's interesting to note that there is an entity who is understood as Jacob that is also known as And so this this east, this light, this flame is also a city in South Babylon. And if you recall, the Chaldeans, another name for Chaldeans or the meaning of Chaldeans is Magi or Maga or Maja or Mago. And so you can see how all of these things are coming together in terms of understanding the nuances of this situation with the East or Austria. Now check this out. You can see here in this deconstruction that this is very specifically a proper name and a location. It is Babylonian Uru, the seat of moon god worship. It also indicates that this is the home of Terah. And again, that's Abraham's or Abram's father. And so synonymous with Ost or Os, we have the construct of Hillel or Halal. This is 1966 in Strong's Concordance in the Hebrew. And this is this sense of brightness, also known as the morning star or Lucifer. And so essentially Babylon, Rome, Austria, Ost, East, these are all synonymous with this morning star Lucifer construct. And here you see another construct introduced to this dynamic. And what you see here is not only morning, sun, dawn, you see this idea, this idea of illumination. And so this sense of enlightenment. And so now we have not only dawn, east, we have this construct of illumination or enlightenment. And so this is another way of understanding the people who are known as the Babylonian Empire. These entities would be considered the enlightened ones, the illuminated ones. The same thing goes with the Roman Empire and the Holy Roman Empire. All of this is pointing to not only physical light, but this idea of cognitive light, this idea of mental enlightenment or spiritual enlightenment or spiritual illumination. Now we're going to look at the breakdown of Austria. And so you can see going back and forth between the English and the German, this construct, this Austria, also being Österreich or Österreich. And you can see the translation. And so if you look at Österreich or Österreich, which is the same as Austria, you will see that there are two constructs in there. So we don't just have East. We have something on the end of Ost. We have Ria. And hopefully you recall what that Ria is all about. And that Ria in the English is translating to this Reich in the German. And so now let's break this all down. So you can see that the Australia and Austria are essentially the same thing, and they are translations of Österreich. And so to start us back over, we see that this Oster means east. Oh, this gets very interesting. Okay. So we also see when going into the Romani, Oster is Oriento. Here we see that in the Hungarian, Oster is Kaleti. And remember, at all times, we are essentially saying Oster, Babylon, Rome, Austria. So we are saying all of that when we are looking at Oster. And so we see here that when translating into the Balinese, that Oster is Kangan. What's also interesting is that Oster is another way of saying Timur. Timur. Yes. And so Babylon, Rome, Austria, all translating as Timur. Now, this is interestingly related to some of the deconstructions we've done related to the Cherokee. And what we see here is that Oster is another way of saying Shar or Mashariki. And so we see this in Swahili and Tibetan. Now, this is very important because this construct of Mashariki is very specific, and it's talking about a specific collective of people and a particular region. And here you see in the Arabic this sharki or shark for Oster. So in other words, this is another way of saying east. This is another way of saying Babylon. This is another way of saying Rome. This is another way of saying Set. Here we see in the Turkish another way of saying east or Austria. Ost is Dogu. And my, when we go into the Greek, something interesting emerges in terms of the identity of perhaps Mystery Babylon, Mystery Rome. What we have here is Rome, Babylon. These are synonymous with Anatolia. And when we go into the Venetian or the Venetian, what we see is that entity that, according to the motto, is to rule the world or under which the world is subject. We see it is not only Orient for East, we see Levant. And so again, you can just interchange these words, these constructs. And so Levant, Orient, is synonymous with Rome, synonymous with Babylon, synonymous ultimately with Set. And we see a repeat of this translation of Levant. And here in the Sicilian, you see Levanti. And so that Oster is the same as Levanti, the Levant. And what pops back up again? Oriental and Timur. And so again, when you look at that motto, that the entire world shall be subject to Austria, what it's also saying, according to these translations, is the entire world shall be subject to Oriental. The entire world shall be subject to Timur. And here you see Timur yet again. And here you see Timur again. And here we see reference to that construct again of Mizrahi. And this again is synonymous with east. And so Oster in the Swedish, translating in the Amharic as Mizrahi. And here we see the translation out of the Swedish into the Hebrew, Mizrach. And here we see the same thing coming out of the Yiddish. So from the Swedish into the Yiddish, we see Mizrach. And so Mizrach, again, is that empire that is destined to rule the whole world. Now we're going to look again at what we have uncovered. Okay, so when we look at that motto is saying the East, Austria, is destined to rule the whole world. Now, what's interesting about that, of course, is basically you have East and West. And so really all you have left is West. And so it's essentially saying that the East shall rule the West. Okay, and so what we see with these words that are translating, we can now identify specific people and specific regions that are synonymous with this Austria. And so we see Anatolia is destined to rule the entire world. We see Dogu, Dog Star, East Star, Eastern Star, Luminary, Sirius Canis Major, the star of SETH. We see Kangan, Kaleti, Levant. The Levant shall rule the whole world. Mizrach, Mizrahi, Oriento, Shar, Shark, and Timur. Now remember, Austria is broken down into two parts. And so you have that Ost, that east part, and then that other part is that Reich. And so we're going to now look at this construct of Reich so that we can see what is embedded in this construct of Austria. So what you see with Reich is that it's another way of saying rich. And so the Eastern or the East rich, as in wealthy, rich. And so according to the motto, this is the entity, the Eastern rich are the ones who are destined to rule the world. And here you see a repeat of this dynamic of Reich, meaning rich. And this is in the Yiddish. And so basically, it's the Eastern rich yet again. Here you see it in German. You see Reich and rich. And here you see something a little different when you see it in the Hungarian. You see that Reich is another word for empire. And so the Eastern Empire is destined to rule the world. Okay? Or you can fill it in with any of those identities that we have considered. So the Anatolian Empire is destined to rule the world. Ultimately, we have a SETH empire that is destined to rule the world according to the motto. And here we see something consistent with Rajasthan. We see Raj is another way of saying Reich. And here specifically we see Reich is another way of saying empire or imperio. And so that's what we were looking at initially, this imperio sign fine, this empire that has no beginning or ending. Now this was an interesting construct here. And so Reich is another way of saying in Indonesian, Negara German. And so, keeping in mind that we essentially only have East and West, what we are talking about when talking about all Earth is subject to, what we are talking about is the West essentially is subject to the East. And so, with respect to that motto, we have all Earth is subject to Oriental or Asian empire. And so you have all Earth is subject to Oriental Reich, rich, Raj, rulers, empire. And here we have the same thing with this construct of Nagara German. We have all Earth is subject to Nagara German Empire or Reich. And here you fill in that shark or sharky, which is a part of Mizrahi. And so you have here all Earth is subject to the shark or the Shar, rich, rulers, empire. Very specifically, we have Anatolia again. And so we know that this is Anatolia is destined to rule the entire world. And so Anatolian Empire, the Anatolian Empire, the rich of Anatolia, they are destined to rule the entire world. Now, of course, we found some interesting connections between certain groups of people and Anatolia previously, and so you might want to go back and visit those examinations. But here we have with the Levant, Levanti, all Earth is subject to the Levant Empire, the Levant rich, the Levant rulers, the Levant Reich. And so, to be clear, we are talking about America. And so, America is subject to these entities that have been identified by all of these different names, but it's all the same thing in terms of translation. And so, again, we have all Earth is subject to Timur, the Timur Empire. In other words, America is subject to the Timur Empire according to the motto. The Timur Empire is destined to rule America. And you can switch that around with each entity that we've looked at. And finally, we have Mizrach or Mizrahi. And so when we are looking at this motto, we see all Earth is subject to. And so not only the East, subject to itself, but the West. And so America is subject to the Mizrahi Empire, rich rulers. When we put all of this together and we look at a map, we see the division of the East and the West and the North and the South. And what we see in terms of what's supposed to be the East is Africa. We also see Asia. We see Europe. And so what appears to be going on with respect to all of these entities that are identified as synonymous with East, it looks like there's a historic confederacy going on with respect to Africa, Asia, and Europe, being a confederate empire, this Eastern Reich, that will rule the entire world. And you see that on the other side of that is America. And so essentially, in terms of what's on the other side, you have America. And so you have Africa, Asia, and Europe as Austria, this Austrian empire. That is the collective entity that is to rule the world, or the entire world, America, will be subject to this confederacy of Africa, Asia, and Europe. And of course, when you look at what took place with the papal bulls, with the conquest dynamic, with the doctrine of discovery, when you look at all of that, you can see how this has played out and how it continues to play out. Now, as you might recall by looking at these different monarchs and these empires, is that there is always a spiritual head for these monarchs, for these kingdoms, for these empires. Now, it's very clear in the papal bulls that Set is the spiritual entity that is behind or undergirding the papal bulls. And so what we see here is not only do we have these specific locations, but we have an entity, this deity known as Set. And you see the manifestation of Set, referring back to the text that we looked at. You see this manifestation of Set in that translation of Austria or Ost as Dogu. We see that the East is another way of referencing the dog star. The dog star is another way of indicating the East star or the Eastern star or the Eastern luminary. This is the great dog or the big dog. This is the Canis Major. This is Sirius. This is the star of Set. And so what is being indicated with respect to who will be ruling the whole world? It is the Sirius star of Set empire that will rule the whole world. It is the Sirius star of Set. In other words, it's Set. Okay, so Set, the Eastern star, Set, the rich of Set, the rulers of Set, the Raj, the Reich of Set, the empire of Set, according to the motto and according to this deconstruction. That empire is the empire that is to rule the whole world. That is the empire under which America, according to this motto, will be or is subject, in subjection to. In other words, the motto is saying all earth is subject to Set or Seth Typhon or Typhon Set or the Typhonian Empire. And that's the same as saying Set. And it's that, again, that donkey, dog-like deity. It's very difficult to ascertain what that Set animal is all about, but it does have a donkey-like quality to it. And again, you see this ubiquitous nature of Set, these representations of Set, these constructs that are rooted in Set or Seth. And you see this symbolism. And one symbol is that of the donkey. And you even see this in some of our political discourse. And so you see these identifications with different animals. And the donkey is one such animal. But the donkey is associated with this Typhon type of identity, that Set or Seth animal. It is also noteworthy when you take all of these things into consideration that there is a relationship between the Emperor Charlemagne and the donkey or that Typhon entity, the star of Set, Sirius, Canis Major. And so there is this relationship between Charlemagne and Set and this symbol of the donkey. What's also interesting is there is a media maker who has taken on the name Charlemagne and also sort of deified the name, by the way. They have taken on this name Charlemagne, and they also have an award that is given out to individuals based upon the behaviors of the individuals. Interestingly, the entity known as Charlemagne has chosen this Typhon like entity as a part of the award that's given out. It's called the Donkey of the Day. And so here you see this odd connection in modern times between an entity known as Charlemagne and this construct of the donkey. Again, you also see this relationship between the donkey and some of these political collectives. And of course, an empire is a collection of thrones, a collection of kingdoms, a collection of crowns. And it's noteworthy that with respect to Set, that Set is also embedded in the construct of throne. Throne is another way of saying seat or set. Yet again, speaking to this, almost ubiquitous nature of Set. You see all of these constructs and these words that, in terms of etymology, they lead you right back to this construct of Set, the appointed one, the seated one, and all of the other interesting constructs that go along with Set. Now let's wrap this up. What we see is there are many names for Babylon. There are many names for Rome. There are many names for Austria. And there are many representatives of this Set deity. And there are a number of collectives that are identifying with this Set deity. They see themselves as a part of the Set Empire. And so we see that the Holy Roman Empire is simply an empire that is the Egyptian deity Set Empire. We see that Set is the deity that, according to the papal bulls, this is the deity that was authorizing or commanding the invasion of the Americas, the invasion of Africa even. And so all of this was under the authority of Set. This was a part of the conquest, the enslavement, the removals, the takings. All of this was under the authority of Set according to the popes. What's also interesting is that Set is being presented as this deity of light. Now, what's also interesting about that is that this light or this flame is not simply about a general light. In some instances, it's related to a direction. But under all of this is this idea of individuals being illuminated, being supernatural, being more enlightened than the average bear. And these Eastern or enlightened entities, these illuminated entities, are also a confederacy. And this confederacy is one that apparently has an axe to grind. There's something going on with respect to this focus on the East ruling the West. And this Eastern Empire, this Typhonian Empire, having a score to settle, is what it sounds like, a score to settle with the West. And so there are a number of dynamics going on here with the Holy Roman Empire and this idea of the world being subject to it, or it being an empire without end. And when we see the centrality of Set or Typhon Seth, we can see more clearly what this is perhaps all about. Now we're going to look into some symbolism with respect to these icons that are associated with the Holy Roman Empire to get a better handle on what's going on with the Holy Roman Empire, what's going on or what has been going on with the Babylonian Empire, what is going on with this Set empire that many people appear to be operating under.